Okay, ladies and gentlemen, lovely to see you as always. This is actually, can you believe it? It's the 5th webinar we've actually done in this series, and we hope you're all staying safe and well and making the best of a somewhat trying situation. My name is Alastair Meiklejon, and today I'm joined by Ben Hanley, who is one of our fantastic team who specialises in modern and contemporary arts. Now, before we start the interview, I'd like to ask our viewers if they would actually mind completing a question at the end of this webinar, which is just a little poll question, just to, kind of at the end to say, you know, whether you've dealt with this before, just to give us some information, really, to be honest. We've had such a fantastic response from these things that we've been doing, and we'd love to be able to hear a little bit more from you. And speaking of hearing a little bit more and a little bit about you, Ben, lovely to see you, as always. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into arts and what you do.
Right. I have been in the art market for nearly, 25, nearly 30 years, to be honest with you. It's something I always wanted to get involved in. When I started out, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. My father wanted me to be a banker, but that clearly wasn't going to happen. So I read art history and classics at Trinity College Dublin and then did an MA at the Courtauld. Originally, I specialised in Old Masters, Italian Baroque in particular. So my first outing in the art market was working for a dealer called Edmondo di Robilant, who deals in Italian and continental Old Master paintings, and a gallery called the Dover Street Gallery, obviously on Dover Street. Well, great name, obviously in Mayfair. In that gallery, there were 3 dealers as well. There was another 3 dealers. There was Charles Beddington, who was a major specialist in Canaletto, and then Richard Nagy, who's the biggest dealer in German Expressionist, and Klimt, Otto Dix, Schiele, that sort of work. So as a sort of grounding in the art market and in quite a broad spectrum, it was. I can't think of a better way of starting out the art market. From there, I morphed into lots of different things. I'm now specialising in contemporary and in post-war and contemporary. I mean, it's market-led. That's where a lot of the money is and a lot of the sort of the business is. But I've got quite a broad range of interests. I mean, one of my old loves is still Old Masters. But as I said, the market has led me into later works.
I think we find in general we're seeing more contemporary works that are kind of proving to be more valuable than people expect now.
And the market's bigger, to be honest. It just is. I mean, it's expanded massively in the last 20, 25 years, both in terms of the number of people buying, but also in the different levels. I mean, the market is, you know, you can, speaking about collecting art, I mean, you can collect £500 or, you know, $450 million for a Da Vinci. I mean, the spectrum is huge, but that breadth is mainly in the contemporary and post-war contemporary market.
Fantastic. I think we'll probably touch more a little bit later on that. Just a few questions for you then, really, Ben. Now, collecting art at the moment is kind of what we're here to talk about. Now, describe to us what a collection is in 2020 and how do you think the definition has changed in the last few decades?
A collection nowadays is exactly the same as it was before. However, going back to what I was saying, I think what's different now is the demographic is much bigger. People are the entry level financially, and the numbers of people who get involved in collecting has increased massively. In my parents' generation, a certain type of person collected and would only think about collecting. It wasn't even if you had the money, it was more a mental issue as well. I mean, you had to be very well heeled of a certain type to collect art. Now that's totally been blitzed. The academic and psychological entry level to art is much more open, and therefore I think that's the difference. I mean, it's a broader range of collectors. Clearly, a collector and starting collecting necessitates an individual taking a conscious decision to put money into art, not just, you know, he goes to an art fair by mistake and picks up a painting. It's a conscious sort of a decision to acquire art in a more regular manner. Some people will have a painting on the wall and they just bought it. They're not collectors in my view. There needs to be a conscious decision to acquire, even if it's one painting a year, one painting every 2 years, depending
on a continued interest.
Exactly, and a considered interest. And you can work to £5,000 or, you know, fingers crossed, £5 million, whatever it is. You know what your budget is, and you can work within that, and you develop a certain taste within that concept. That's a collection for me. And that concept hasn't really changed. It's just across time. It's just the demographic and
the way in which people have done it. No, I see. But now the art market, unfortunately, and I disagree with this, and you probably will disagree with it as well to a certain degree. But the art market has a bit of a reputation for being intimidating, a bit snooty, a bit snobbish. Is that true anymore? I think there seems to be kind of a big opinion.
It is and it's not. I mean, the art market, don't get me wrong, a lot of wealthy people buy art and historically have, and the top end of the market is always driven by that. And therefore, there's a link between society, art, social, all that sort of meld, which is very useful in terms of marketing. I mean, people want to be part of a smart club, so therefore they're interested in art. Christie's, Sotheby's, all the major galleries as well, you know, they play on that to a degree. However, fundamentally, the art market is a commercial market. If you want to buy, just go in and buy. I mean, I think that's the first rule I would stress with a new collector is ignore that sort of frippery around it. It can be fun to be part of it, but at the end of the day, if you've got some money in your wallet, you're as good as the next person, and just go in and, you know, just try to ignore it. Don't be intimidated, because if you're intimidated, you won't ask questions. If you don't ask questions, you won't create a relationship with whoever you're buying from. And then, you know, it just becomes more complicated. It's just, and also, I mean, there is also a perception about the art market being totally exclusive, and that you have to be of a certain background, etc., etc. That, I mean, even historically, to a great extent, you didn't have to be, but now that's total nonsense. I mean, people want to sell, and they want to, you know, the collector base. They want to develop a collector base, particularly if we go back to what I was saying about old masters. That historically, that collector base was, they're now in their 60s and 70s and 80s. So therefore, old master collectors are constantly looking for new, younger collectors. So,
but I think totally true. I mean, as you say, it's your money is as good as anyone else's, and I think galleries and dealers appreciate that. And to be perfectly honest, I think you getting through the door is just as important to them as somebody that's got 20 odd paintings.
And if the door has a doorbell, it's there for a reason. There are expensive things inside, so therefore they have to protect. It's a little security. It can be intimidating. Press the button. If you're time wasted, they won't give you any time. Of course, people in all areas, you've got a job to do. But if you're interested and you want to learn, press that doorbell, go in, there's no problem. And anybody...
That's an interesting point, actually, yes. You know, I think the doorbell, unfortunately, whether it be at Cartier or whether it be at...
exactly.
It is yeah, one of those things.
Security, but it's also there, unfortunately, to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. I mean, people who are serious have to take that, you know, that sort of mechanism. They have to press the button, the doorbell.
Ben, the article which I read last week, which I thoroughly enjoyed, you speak about knowing your potential kind of target market and working out really where you want to be with things and what you're looking at. I mean, as an amateur who's looking at collecting things, where do you start?
You mean defining what you want to buy in?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, look, everybody, no matter where they start from, will start from somewhere. They'll have seen Constable's Haywain. They'll have seen a Damien Hott spot painting. Wherever their basic tastes have started from, that's where they'll start. And you'll go to, I mean, there's no better time now than now in terms of access about art. We're inundated with galleries, exhibitions, the Tate. I mean, all the major galleries are begging people to visit their exhibition. So you can,
maybe not specifically right now, but
no. Yeah. Although you say that, if you go online, everything is now digital. They're still trying to keep and hold their target market, because if they lose them, they're scared they won't come back. So anyway, just going back, there's a huge network out there that anybody can access in terms of sourcing imagery, and understanding art is and why an artist did something is very important. But just even if you don't know that, just seeing lots of images, they build up a visual memory in your memory bank in your head, and you'll see what you like, what you don't like. But everybody starts from one specific area, and that's specific to them, and then they sort of meander through, and tastes change.
So let's say, Ben, I know what I like, I know what I want. How do you go about maybe making that first step into the research? Do you go and visit galleries? Do you go and speak to a specialist? Do you go and speak to a dealer? How do you get that foundation to actually have, I don't know, just the confidence to actually go and step into a gallery and think, okay, this is what I want?
The first thing you do is check your bank balance, because there's no point wanting a Da Vinci if you can afford a £500 print. So know the market in terms of the parameters of the budget. That's the number one thing. Figure out the sort of area you like. If you like more traditional art, then that's, you know, you just the look and feel of it. You have to do that. Then go around. I mean, there's a little guide in London. So I'm being slightly London centric here, but there'll be guides all over the UK called the Galleries Guide. It lists every commercial gallery and all the sort of state-run institutions. Get a copy of that. Every month it lists what's on. Time Out lists what's on. Go and have a look. You know, computer, just do it. You have to do some research just to see what you like. There are a number of different. Then you have to decide how you want to buy. I mean, I
was going to say, once you've made the decision about what you're looking for, what you're willing to spend, that next step really is
you have to decide what you're comfortable. There are different methods. You've got auction, you've got galleries. Let's say they're the two main ones. Within that, you also have art fairs, studio visits, etc., etc. But auction or gallery, if you're tentative and I've got £1,000 to spend and you don't want to go to auction because doing the bidding is all a bit scary and people are nervous, you'll probably buy from a primary gallery. They've got a price on it, and it's a much more easy entry. Once your confidence develops, once also you understand what the market is in terms of pricing, because if you go to an auction house, there is the possibility of you overpaying, because they just, you know, an auction, you know, that classic thing, sit in your hands during an auction until you want to.
I'll come to that question later, I think, because I think that's a question that a lot of our viewers will actually be intrigued by. But yeah, sorry, back to you.
But it's just about confidence. I mean, go through the door of the gallery or the auction house. Everybody there is there to help. Clearly, they don't want time wasters. They want somebody who wants to buy. But if you're sincere about buying, they will help. Ask questions. They'll guide you. They will show you other things. If that painting is £5,000 and you've got £1,000, they'll potentially give you options. Maybe a drawing rather than a painting, or an artist similar to that. So just have a conversation.
Do you think it's
if you ask
sorry, Ben, do you think it's important to work out if you are going to be a primary market buyer or a secondary market buyer as soon as you can, or do you just approach it with an open mind?
Well, it depends if you like dead artists or living artists, to be very frank. So if you want a Chile or if you want a Picasso, it'll be secondary market. There we go. To be honest, it's what you buy will often lead you to the source of where you buy it from. But you know, I come from a background of dealers and dealership. I've also worked in the auction market, but there's something very beautiful. People always get nervous with dealers. If you build a relationship, and we're talking about proper dealers and people who have a passion for their art and for what they do, there's nothing as nice as a relationship that can be built between a client and a dealer. But it's symbiotic. Clearly, the dealer gets a sale out of it, but he also develops the taste of his client, and it's just
the reputation, and it's working out.
Absolutely, and you pay for that, of course. Yeah. But you're in a safe pair of hands, and you know they'll work within your budget and guide you. It's simple as that. Now, clearly, if you're just after more decorative painting, go to some, you know, it's not quite the level of investment in time isn't as much. You can just, you know, go to an affordable art fair or something like that and look at something equally valid. It just depends how much you want to spend and how serious you want to be in terms of your collecting strategy.
I do like the affordable art fair.
It's a great concept.
Lots and lots of fun. Great concept. Now we spoke.
Also, by the way, sorry, it's not that affordable anymore. It's up to £10,000, so it's getting less affordable.
Days are gone when you could go and buy a postcard piece of artwork for next to nothing, unfortunately. But alas, there was some interesting things that came out of it as well.
The concept's very good. It's more egalitarian and accessible.
Certainly. Now, artist studio visits, graduation shows, is it sometimes worth taking a punt on something that you think might be of some value in the future, if you like the picture?
I'd never suggest that you do a studio visit is different to, let's say, a graduation. Graduation show, they're straight out of college. Basically, some people don't understand what it is. It's basically, you go to the Royal College of Art every year. The graduation ceremony involves you present your work. So at the end of that, every year you have an exhibition that showcases the final work of all the students. That is different to a studio visit. At the graduate show, is very risky. It's a wonderful thing, and you should definitely go and support, buy, and whatever. But
I've
I wouldn't buy
got
for
3 or 4
investment sake.
pieces. Yep, I've got 3 or 4 pieces from graduation shows, and
If
they're
you
fantastic
want to
pieces.
invest, I would, unless you know exactly what you're doing, that the modus operandi wouldn't, or the rationale wouldn't be, for me, wouldn't be investment, because there's no track record at all, and therefore you can make boo-boos purely in terms of investment, not in terms of something you like on the wall. So if you want,
but generally speaking, at graduation shows, a lot of the time though, that the costs are not quite as prohibitive as taking.
They're not at all. They're normally in hundreds to low thousands.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a great place to go to start off. It's just, if you want to, for an investment, be careful. Try it as well. You can. Damien Hirst started somewhere, but if you want to get a fantastic thing at a better price, definitely, and also support it. I encourage an artist.
That's the thing, really, isn't it? Being able to push art on with putting the new breed of artists through is brilliant. Now, we've just spoken briefly about the different costs and the different cost implications. So obviously, going through a gallery, buying potentially a similar piece through an auction, or buying a similar piece through a dealer, there are going to be kind of substantial price differences, aren't there, within these pieces? Yeah.
A gallery, that lovely girl sitting on the desk and that glass of champagne isn't free. So therefore, you pay for the overheads of the gallery. You also pay for the curator's eye. You mentioned the reputation of the gallery. You pay for that, and also you pay for the fact that you can go in any day of the week and you can choose something. You don't have to wait for it. So that would be a full retail environment. Now, clearly, the prices of retail environment in Knightsbridge will be a higher retail price than somewhere in suburbia. So therefore, where you buy is also will change the price, but it's a set price. In terms of auction, you can get, that's more of a wholesale price. If it doesn't really it's not the best phrase, but you get it you can potentially get things lower than a gallery price, but because it's a bidding situation, you have sales estimates. It doesn't have to stay within the sales estimate. You could pay 3 times. If you can pay much more in an auction if you bid against somebody than you would pay in a gallery. You just have to be a bit aware. Always remember, when it comes to an auction, you're going to be paying 20% plus or minus in terms of buyer's fees as well. So factor that in when you set your budget going into an auction house.
Being confident in that purchase that you are making, obviously, a gallery or a dealer, depending on their reputation, you would put your trust and confidence in them that this is right and this is a fair price, etc., etc. Now, with an auction house, for example, do you have some form of comeback if in a few years' time you realise it's wrong? Should you get these things independently assessed before you even purchase them? What's your view on that?
It depends. Like everything in life, there are varying degrees of auction house, and clearly you have more comeback potentially at a higher level. The more seriously auction houses. If an auction house says it's by Picasso and it turns out not to be by Picasso, you can get your money back. It's as simple as that. There are in an auction house, as you know, Alastair, since you work in that world, there are different variations of how you catalogue an item. If it says Picasso, it's Picasso. If it says after, well, then it's a follow of, it's studio of. There are varying degrees. So the auction house will put its reputation behind the attribution, and therefore that should give you confidence. Clearly, the more money you're spending, and technically, generally speaking, if you're spending a lot of money, you will have professional help anyway. All that due diligence will be done independently as well. It just depends, once again, on the level that you're investing in. But the auction house does give some guarantees. I mean, they have a huge list of exemptions, of course, but if it says it's by Picasso and it turns out not to be, well, then of course you can go back and claim. Now, I think it's up to 6 years or something. I'm not sure what the cutoff line is.
And I suppose there is a lot to be said for putting your faith and actually working with the fact, that the people that work in that auction house know what they're doing.
Absolutely. Clearly, mistakes happen across, and that's across the industry. But generally speaking, a good auction house can be trusted. Now, as I said, mistakes happen. The lower the lot value and the bigger the sales, perhaps not as much attention is given to the individual lots. That's just by the nature of it. But a lot of confidence can be given in auction houses. Just like anybody serious, be it auction or be it a dealer, they've done their own due diligence for their reputation and to cover themselves, generally speaking.
And coming back to that, which a dealer, a gallery and an auction house should do, is understanding the provenance of a piece.
Yes.
Can you talk to us about how we look into the provenance and understanding how it works?
A provenance is a very fancy name for basically the ownership history of a work that goes back. As ideally, what you want is day dot when it was painted, all the way up now, up to today. When you're buying it, you want to see exactly who sold it. Ideally, it's gone through some great galleries, some great collections. If a Rothschild has bought it, clearly that adds to the importance of the work, because by association, their collections are legendary. So therefore, they would have vetted it with their sort of curatorial eye. Therefore, all these sort of things add to the value of the work. If there are big gaps in provenance, that's what people get nervous about, or if they're very vague, because that's just going down to authenticity and whether an item is fake or not. If there are big gaps, you'd question why. So it's like an MOT, fancy MOT for a car. Provenance is for a painting or a work of art.
It's a buyer's history, isn't it?
Exactly,
Really?
100%.
Now, in terms of, you mentioned there in a provenance, if you actually have it, and I think you and I both like to see a nice gallery label on the back of something when you see it. Now, does that put, in terms of, let's say you are buying for something to put on the wall, you want to enjoy it, but you want to know that there is going to be some form of investment there. Is it worth paying that extra bit of money to go, okay, well, I bought it from XYZ on Pall Mall, as opposed to buying it from XYZ in rural Leicestershire, from a potentially somebody that hasn't got that same kind of level of attribution skills?
There's a safety net, generally speaking. If you're relying in everything in the art market, if you're relying on somebody else's expertise rather than using your own and taking a risk, you'll pay more. So therefore, if you buy I'm not wanting to name galleries, but from very punchy galleries on Bond Street or in Mayfair, you have their curatorial backup. If you take a wing on a prayer and use your own eye and buy from an auction house, well then clearly there's less net under you in case you make a mistake. So it is what it is. But just buying from an expensive gallery doesn't mean that when you resell it, it'll be worth more. That's a fallacy. It just gives you more confidence, because there's somewhere where the buck stops. You bought it as itemized in the catalogue.
Fantastic. Now, loving an item is clearly one of the main reasons for buying art. Yep. But I'm sure everyone's had that kind of thing where they think, oh gosh, I'm just in love with this piece of art and I need to have it. How do you stop yourself putting your hand up too many times? How do you stop yourself spending too much money?
All goes back to look at your bank account before you go in, because if you can't afford it, don't. Look, there's a lot to be said for if the work of art is of super high quality or huge emotional appeal to you, and you're not entirely talking about investment, bid higher. To be honest with you, it just depends. If your raison d'etre for buying that painting is linked to investment, then you have to be very strict, and investors always are. I mean, there's no emotion to investment purchasing. So it just depends what the rationale for you is. There's something called buyer's remorse, and it comes in both ways. One is to buy when the first thing you bought and it was a dud, but the normal one is the one that got away. If you just put your hand up once more, you would have got it, and now you regret that. So it depends if you have a little leeway financially. If the pictures, it depends how much you want it basically, and then maybe there's an argument for paying a little bit more at a certain time for that one picture. Don't do it too regularly, otherwise your collection will end up being quite small.
I do think actually one of the things I hear most from collectors is, oh, I was the underbidder on that, or oh, I was the underbidder on that. And I think that seems to be, as you say, the non-buyer's remorse.
And often in situations like that, they'll go back and they will bid up on another work that's similar, but not quite as good, and they'll end up buying a work that isn't quite as good. And
sometimes for more money.
Or even the same money, but 10 years down the line, 10-15% extra is gone. It makes no difference, but you're left with not quite as good a painting. So sometimes there is an argument for being a little bit bullish in buying, because quality is important in the purchase.
Having said that, Ben, it's a strange thing, but you mentioned in your article about taking your time with making sure that you get the right thing. Now, I don't know about you, but if I make a decision about wanting something, I want it there and then. I'm not very good at taking my time about wanting something. But would it be wrong to say, you know, take your time and make sure you get the right thing, and just, you know, even if you see something past that isn't quite 100%, I suppose it's dependent on different artists.
It's very much dependent on what you're looking for. If you're going for something that is decorative on the wall, where it's by a contemporary artist, basically there's more on the market, well then go and buy it. There's no problem. But you know, just by the very nature of any market, the more specific you are, and the more exclusive in your choice, in be it quality or size, whatever the parameters are, it's that you have to wait by necessity. In terms of the concept of taking your time, it's all about, you know, your knowledge base will increase the more you see. So
Right.
by all means dive in there at the beginning, but what often happens is people dive in at the beginning and then they maybe pay a little bit too much and feel a bit silly, and then they take some time back, and then they move forward, because then they take time.
It's funny when you talk about, sorry Ben, when you talk about paying too much, it raises an interesting question. It's how can you be sure that you haven't overpaid? And what would you do if a gallery overcharged you? And would you recommend something, if you're interested, to have valuations before you purchase something?
Yes, there is. If the price point of the item that you're buying is significant, yes, of course, there's an argument to get pre-advice. Of course, there's 100%, and that's, most collectors have an art advisor who they use either full-time or they bring in and out to advise on an investment. In terms of, but you know, once you buy from a gallery, if you agree that price, there's no comeback. I mean, you've agreed the price. It's as simple as that. If you go into an auction and you put your hand up too many times, you've had a few glasses of champagne, or you're buying against somebody else, that's what you've done. You know, you've made the mistake. But define what's too much. It also goes down to what the basis of your purchase is. If it's investment, then you can pay too much, and that's about comparative pricing, etc., etc. If you're buying because you love an item, and quite frankly you're never going to sell it, or you'll sell it in 20 years time, it becomes less important. That the concept of paying a little bit too much.
Do you believe, Ben, that even when you're starting a collection,
yep,
always buying the best that you can afford in the long run is usually the best way to approach things?
It's not usually, it's always the best way. And that's why sometimes paying a little bit more, if you identify a work of art, whatever it is, as being great, or the name of the artist being fantastic, sometimes it's better to, it's always better to, you know, quality counts. If you're reselling, remember, you're just one link in a long continuing chain of collectors. You'll build your collection starting at 20, you die at 80. That's then broken up and sold on to the younger collectors. So there'll always be a train of people looking at what you've got eventually. So if you buy quality, that will always, you know, they'll be the ones that people want to buy. So you sort of, what's the word? You protect yourself from inflation, or wrong word, but you protect your investment by buying higher quality works of art. There's an very famous art dealing family called the Mugrabis. I mean, they're like the builders. Yes. They're huge. I mean, they're two generational. The current sons, David and Albert, a friend of mine used to work for them. He used to be their in-house expert for Impressionist and Modern. He's now left, a big dealer himself. Just to illustrate this point, and now they've got billions in art. I mean, we're not talking about this is investment collecting. I think they corner markets. They've got the biggest collection of Warhol. I mean, when they choose an artist, they buy deeply and control the market. Anyway, this friend of mine was advising them to buy a fabulous Camille Pissarro painting, the best of its time. This was about 20 years ago. The price point at the time, I think, was about $3 million. So it was a lot of money, and it was a lot of money for Pissarro, but it was the best museum quality piece. And he advised them that the quality, blah, 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 was spectacular. They eventually went and bought a third-rate Picasso for the same money. And he said, why? And they went back to him and said, and this comes out about the quality of the name, a bad Picasso is still a Picasso. A Camille Pissarro, you need to know, and you need knowledge to understand what Camille Pissarro is, but a Picasso is a Picasso is a Picasso, and so long as it's signed, it'll have its value. So the concept of quality is in two different ways. One is buying a name, and the other is just buying a good work. You know, it works in both ways.
When we're talking about purchasing those items and making sure that you're buying the best that you can possibly afford. There's something, for example, that might be a little bit out of your price range. Now, as an art advisor, do you negotiate with clients? I mean, I think, you know, with a house, for example, you can employ somebody to go and look around the house and actually negotiate on your behalf. Is there a similar, kind of purpose that you could kind of employ as an art expert?
Of course. I mean, an art advisor advises, and his role will be as big as the client wants. A lot of clients don't want to be involved in particularly at the high level. They don't want their names, the identity of the purchaser revealed. So they'll have a proxy, the art advisor, who will negotiate. When you, with or without an art advisor, always remember, short of an auction, that's a public price, you can't do anything about it. But a dealer, he's called a dealer for a reason, because he wants to make a deal. There's always some flexibility. Even a gallery that has a fixed price on it, there's normally a margin of about 10%, maybe 15%. Now probably 25% during this current market. That you don't be scared or nervous about asking for a discount, even if you don't have an art advisor. There's generally some flexibility. Clearly,
I was going to say, can you walk into one of these galleries that you and I know fairly well and say, okay, I'm really fond of this.
What's your best price? Of course you can.
What can you do?
And the worst thing is it's a set price, but there's often a movement in the price. There's often. Now, clearly, don't go in asking for the best price and then walking away. Only ask when you're serious. It gives you strength. If you're ready to sign on the dotted line, that's the time to ask numbers, talk numbers.
Right, I see. Now, let's talk a little bit about strategies. So are there different types of collectors, I'm assuming, in terms of the way in which you would approach forming this collection?
It depends. Whenever I advise a client, the first conversation I have, apart from budgetary, I mean, that's a given, but that's the actual, in terms of strategy, is what do you want out of the collection? Nobody wants to lose money, but what's your primary focus? Is it to build an interesting collection that you love and represents you and your taste as it evolves? That's one side. Or is it investment based? If it's investment based, it's actually in a way clearer, not as exciting, but it's clearer, because you choose. You don't have to like. There's no emotion to it. You identify areas that are on the up, or you look for prime examples of blue chip artists that are underpriced for whatever reason. A forced sale or whatever the situation is. That's a totally different strategy to somebody who's building a collection on the long term. As I said, nobody wants to lose money, but the financial gain isn't the primary objective. So that's what I would say, that those are the two differences in collecting. And clearly within that there were sub points, but they would be the main differences.
Ben, this has been absolutely fascinating and a fantastic eye-opener for me, and I'm sure for everyone watching as well at home. Ben, just briefly, so tell us, what's the best thing you've ever handled? What's the most favourite piece that you've actually had the opportunity of working with?
I've got a soft spot for Cy Twombly. So I sold a major chalkboard piece last year for 8 figures. So that was the biggest, I have to say. But my first purchase, because unfortunately I didn't have the money to buy it, was an Egyptian Shapti figure, which is a little thing that size, which is a tomb figure for an attendant. Basically, when you died, you went to heaven and you didn't want to do work, so you had these little figures of servants who did the work for you. So that was my first. It cost me 250 quid, and I've still got it, and I love it. His name's Tahotep.
And obviously, that's the reason for buying things like that, because you know they're going to be with you.
Now, please understand, I would prefer to own the Cy Twombly than I would the if I'd swap it like that. But in terms of the thing that I've got the most soft spot for is that little figurine. It was the first thing I bought.
Right, Ben, we've just got one more question that's come in from the floor. It's a very simple question. Why would you buy at auction rather than a gallery?
Because you can get things at a cheaper price. Going back to our conversation before, you go to a gallery, you're paying for the overheads, you're paying for the W1 postcode, you're paying for the person on the desk, you're paying for champagne, you're paying for the catalogs, you're paying for all those things. So therefore, it's a full retail environment. Auction, if you keep your eyes open, first of all, there's a huge volume of work coming through of all different types. So you know, and they do, let's say post-war contemporary, they'll do 4 sales a year here, they'll do them in Paris, they do them in New York. If you want to keep your eyes open, there's a huge amount of material. If you buy correctly, and by that I mean buy within the estimates, you will get, but even with paying the what's it called, the purchase premiums, you essentially come out with a preferential price. Because
now, Ben, if it's purchased at auction, I'm assuming then we deal with this on a very regular basis. So working out a figure that you would actually insure it for is completely different from what you would actually buy it at auction, isn't it, really? And
that's, as you know, that's one of the first questions when you talk, because what we've been talking about starting an art collection, I'm insuring it at totally different sort of parameters. If you're coming into value an art collection, you need a standardized valuation system. So you can't, there's no point, somebody might have bought it in a high-end gallery, somebody might have bought it at auction. You need to have a standardized value across the board. You can't have pick and mix, otherwise it's, because the purpose of an auction, of a valuation is, if God forbid the house goes up, where would you buy it and replace it? So there needs to be a standardized platform. If everything is auction, then you can do an auction valuation. Otherwise, we would suggest doing a mid to high retail replacement. So therefore, if you bought something at auction within the normal parameters of a similar item, let's say £10,000, chances are in a gallery that would be 20,000, 25,000. It just depends where the gallery is. And then we would do that sort of extrapolation and come up with a standardized valuation across the whole collection.
But I mean, as I'm sure you find as well, there is no standard algorithm for things like this, and this is why
it's about quality.
You have to see the items, and you have to see
100%. You have to examine the condition. You have to see the provenance. Now, once again, provenance at certain levels affects the price more. But it's not just a multiplication. I mean, I hope I don't make it sound that easy, but it's, there are lots of different factors, but you should definitely insure at a retail price, retail replacement gallery price, rather than an auction price. Otherwise, you could, if something, God forbid, does happen, because remember, you could be underinsured. Because remember, the downside to an auction is the supply. Whilst it's continuous, it's erratic. You don't know what you're going to get and when you're going to get.
You're never going to get the same thing from the same auction house.
Exactly.
It's sporadic at best.
And that's a negative versus the positive. I mean, each purchase route has positives and negatives, pluses and minuses.
Ben, this has been absolutely fantastic. One of the favourite ones I've done so far. It's been absolutely brilliant. So thank you ever so much. Right, as you're aware, no doubt, we are still working on some fantastic valuations at the moment with your clients, and starting to discuss appointments for some time in the future. When that will be, I don't know. But please do get in touch with us at inquiries@doerrvaluations.co.uk. And so at this point, I'll leave you for today. Now, if you would be so kind as just to fill in the poll question in a couple of seconds, that would be great, and it gives us a little bit more information as to knowing you and what kind of thing you wouldn't mind us talking about. So many thanks, everyone. Thank you ever so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again. Stay safe, everyone. Thanks, Ben. Bye bye now.